Today, we're diving into a true story that absolutely nails that suffocating dread of being trapped. Picture this. It's 2020. We're in Paris, right near the gorgeous, historic Arc de Triomphe. Usually, this is one of the most bustling spots on the planet, right? But it's the absolute height of a strict COVID-19 lockdown. The whole area has been declared a red zone. The streets are literally dead empty, heavily guarded by local police, making sure nobody leaves their homes. It's this incredibly eerie, unnatural quiet. But here's the thing. The true terror wasn't the global pandemic raging outside. No, the real nightmare was what was locked inside with them.
So, outside, the red zones of Paris were dead silent. But inside one very specific apartment, an ancient terror was just waking up. Seriously, imagine looking out your window and seeing armed police enforcing a mandatory quarantine. You literally cannot leave. There's nowhere to run. Now imagine that sinking feeling when you realize the so-called safe haven you're locked inside of is actively turning against you. Because that is exactly the nightmare our protagonist, a student named Dinda, was about to face.
Okay, let's set the scene. Dinda had moved to France to study the language, and she was living in what the French call a colocation. It's basically just a shared apartment where multiple tenants live together. So Dinda is sharing the space with 4 other international classmates: Grace, Rara, Ben, and Alex. And at first, honestly, this colocation seemed like a total blessing. It was clean, comfortable, and a pretty great place to wait out the quarantine. But, a colocation also means super cramped quarters. We're talking shared mirrors, a single shared bathroom, paper-thin walls. When the paranormal starts bleeding into your everyday reality, that cozy colocation suddenly turns into a claustrophobic cage where there is absolutely nowhere to hide. And what makes this whole account so incredibly gripping is just how terrifyingly fast the situation went south. We aren't talking about a slow, months-long creepy house haunting here. This was a rapid descent into pure chaos. Look at the timeline. Day 1 of the lockdown, completely peaceful, totally normal. But by day 2, the psychological cracks are already starting to show with a deeply disturbing dream. By day 4, physical impossibilities are happening in the bathroom. And by day 5, well, the apartment plunges into full-blown 3 a.m. terror. Let's look a little closer at how this nightmare actually kicked off. It all started with Grace. One night, Dinda and Alex are up late studying in the living room, just minding their own business. Out of nowhere, Grace comes stumbling out of her bedroom, absolutely pale and totally panicked. She had just woken up from a horrifying nightmare. She tells them that in her dream, she was staring into this big mirror they kept right there in the living room. But the reflection staring back at her, it wasn't hers. It was a woman in a white dress. And this woman just stared at Grace with this dead, empty, expressionless face. Until suddenly, her face just twisted up in pure rage, and she started shrieking in this really broken, jagged way. Of course, Dinda and Alex, being rational students, just kind of laughed it off, right? They told Grace it was just a bad dream, probably the lockdown stress, and told her to go back to bed. But the thing is, the haunting didn't safely locked in her head. Just one day later, the terror fully crossed the line into the waking world. It's the middle of the night, and Grace comes absolutely sprinting into Dinda's room, just petrified. And she wasn't dreaming this time. She was wide awake, walking to the bathroom, and she happened to glance into that exact same living room mirror. And you guessed it, she saw the woman in the white dress physically standing right there in the glass. The terror was so absolute, so real, that Grace outright refused to ever walk past that mirror again. She literally begged to sleep on the floor in Dinda's cramped room instead. The entity wasn't a dream anymore. It was sharing their physical space. And then, the haunting shifts its focus right onto Dinda. Late one night, Dinda's half asleep on the TV room sofa. She sort of half wakes up and sees her roommate Ben walk right past her and go into the bathroom. Okay, pretty normal. But a few minutes later, her other roommate, Alex, comes out, desperately needing to use the restroom. So he knocks on the bathroom door. "Hurry up, Ben," he says. Silence. He knocks a bit louder. Still absolutely nothing. Dinda gets annoyed and tells Alex to just leave Ben alone. But Alex turns, looks at Dinda in total confusion, and drops this bombshell. Ben isn't here. He left for his parents' house 2 days ago. I mean, imagine that moment. Dinda's annoyance instantly turns to pure ice-cold dread. She insists she just saw him walk in. So Alex tries the handle. The bathroom door is locked from the inside.
Imagine the chilling realization setting in right there in that tiny hallway. Rora, another roommate, whips out her phone and calls Ben. He picks up immediately, totally confirming he's miles and miles away at his parents' house. So the obvious, terrifying question is, who or what is behind that locked door? Rora grabs the spare apartment key. With their hearts absolutely pounding out of their chests, they slowly unlock and push the bathroom door open. And it is completely, utterly empty. There's no one there. And that's when Dinda is struck with a horrifying thought. Even if she had just been sleep-deprived and dreaming that she saw Ben, a dream cannot physically turn a deadbolt on a door from the inside. Something unseen was undeniably trapped in that apartment with them. Now, the very next day brought this deeply, deeply unsettling calm before the storm. Dinda and Rora managed to get clearance to run out briefly for some groceries, so they left Grace alone in the apartment. When they get back, they find Grace sitting right at the dining table. But she isn't eating, she isn't reading, she isn't doing anything. She's just sitting there, completely frozen. Her eyes are just empty and dead, staring at absolutely nothing. Dinda and Rora try talking to her. They're like, hey, are you okay? Have you eaten? Grace doesn't even blink. She doesn't respond at all. She's just locked in this waking catatonia, completely ignoring them. They kind of just assumed she was in a weird mood from being cooped up, completely unaware that this icy silence was the entity's final warning. And this brilliantly illustrates how things went from creepy to absolutely catastrophic. At exactly 3 a.m. that night, the haunting just shattered the silence. Dinda is jolted awake by violent, aggressive pounding on her bedroom door. It's Rora, practically screaming for Dinda to come out. And from down the hall, these horrific, blood-curdling screams are echoing out of Grace's room. When Dinda throws open the door, the sight is just pure nightmare fuel. Grace is jumping and thrashing on the bed with this crazy, unnatural strength. Her eyes are wide, bulging, unblinking, just staring with pure malice. And the craziest part? She is maniacally, rhythmically clapping her hands and screaming at lightning speed in perfectly fluent, native-accented French. Grace is an international student. She barely spoke a word of French. This moment right here creates such an agonizing contrast between undeniable paranormal horror and maddening disbelief. On one hand, you have Dinda. She's witnessing a girl speak an unknown language with impossible strength and eyes that literally didn't look like they belonged to her. She instantly knew this was a full-blown demonic possession. But then you have Rora, totally leaning on a skeptical Western worldview, flatly refusing to believe what's right in front of her. And it gets worse. Dinda forces Rora to flag down the lockdown police patrolling outside. But when they come in, the French officers literally just roll their eyes. They totally assume Grace is just having a bad trip on some heavy drugs. It created this profound, terrifying sense of isolation for Dinda. She is locked in a cage with a monster, and the authorities fundamentally deny the monster even exists. So, the police confidently march into the bedroom, completely expecting to just arrest a drug user. But the exact second they cross the threshold, the possessed Grace violently and aggressively attacks them. And the sheer, unnatural force of this entity completely shatters the officer's skepticism in an instant. These are armed, trained police officers, and they actually panic. They physically back away, absolutely refusing to go anywhere near her again. Realizing that the secular authorities were completely useless, Dinah took a truly desperate measure. Wearing only her indoor lounge clothes, she frantically sprints out into the freezing, heavily guarded red zone winter night. She's literally risking arrest running through the empty streets of Paris to find a local Catholic church. She just desperately bangs on the doors until she manages to wake up a Romo, a priest, begging him for a spiritual intervention. Thankfully, the Romo agreed to follow Dinda back to the apartment. When he gets there, he sees the terrified police officers and Rara basically cowering out in the hallway. Without a second of hesitation, the Romo steps right into the room with the thrashing, screaming Grace and firmly locks the door behind him. What followed was 30 minutes of just unbearable tension. Dinda, Rara, and the cops are just standing frozen in the hallway. They're listening to the muffled, fluent French screaming, that manic laughter, and the awful rhythmic clapping echoing right through the wood of the door. And then, agonizingly slowly, the clapping fades, the screaming stops, and a dead silence falls over the apartment. So the crucial point here
is what happens next. When the Romo finally emerges, he's exhausted but totally calm. He tells them Grace is safe and fast asleep, but the explanation he gave them, it chilled Dinda right to the bone. From the Romo's spiritual perspective, this wasn't just some random ghost passing through. He revealed that this entity was an incredibly powerful ancient female spirit who had been haunting this specific historic Parisian building for a very, very long time. And the craziest part, without Dinda even telling him about the mirror or the bathroom incidents, the Romo confirmed that the spirit had been actively watching Grace. She'd been testing her, manifesting twice before finally gathering the energy to take total physical control of her body.
Grace did survive the ordeal, thank goodness, though she was so deeply traumatized, she outright refused to ever speak about what she experienced while trapped inside her own mind. And Dinda? She moved out the literal second that lockdown lifted. But guys, the story actually doesn't end there. Dinda recently heard from a brand new tenant from Indonesia who moved into that exact same Parisian co-location. And this new tenant reported that a woman in a white dress is still frequently seen standing perfectly still in the apartment. The spirit was there before them, and she remains there today. Which leaves us with a genuinely terrifying, provocative thought about the unseen histories of the spaces we all inhabit. When your doors are locked and you think you are completely alone, who is watching you from the corners of your own home? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.